Ladies and gentlemen, and the community of individual who stutters, welcome to an other episode of ISA podcast. And today, our guest is very special. He is not only the board member of ISA for many years, but also he is also not only an individual who stutters, he is also a speech language pathologist. So in this podcast, we will talk to him. We will try to know his findings and his experience being an individual who stammers, and also uh, his work and research for this community. So please welcome with the I like to invite him with immense pleasure. Please welcome uh, Rodney Gabel. Welcome, Rodney. How are you?
I, I'm great, and thanks for spending the time with me today and inviting me.
Most welcome, and uh, um, uh, 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 I'm thankful to you because I was trying to get time for the podcast, but we were not able to fix a schedule, and I'm glad we did. Thank you so much. So yeah, so what like being an uh, individual who stammers and also a speech language uh, a pathologist. So like what pushed you to get into this field, and uh, uh, a speech language pathologist uh, is also an individual who stammers. So does that make him or her better from a regular SLPs? You share.
Good question. So first off, I became aware that I stuttered. I mean, pretty early in life. I think I started to stutter right when I started to speak. So I always ran into a lot of speech language pathologists because my parents tried very hard to help me. And as a lot of people, I think I'm learning not only in the United States, but around the world, we don't always run into speech language pathologists who have the background, the experiences to do a good job supporting us. So, and stuttering is a tough condition to cope with. I mean, it's just very difficult, like, anyways. But so I think I was giving up hope on getting any better, but was also doing, I think, well enough, with my life and school and all that when I was a teenager. And then my mom, who was always told not to talk with me about my stuttering, to not make too big of a deal out of it and all of that, which I think was probably terrible advice. But at the time, that was the advice we had. She just started bringing home books about stuttering. So I was like 13 years old, and like she would just bring home some books and say, "Hey, I got you some books at our library." And started to notice increasingly that most of them were about stuttering. Books by Charles Van Riper. And so I started to read them, and Charles Van Riper was a really intriguing writer, and certainly was a giant in the area of stuttering in the United States and I think internationally, and had some really interesting theories and ideas, and just also very motivating. So I think that started to get me more interested in maybe doing something about stuttering. And then my school district supported us in going to be evaluated at a university fairly close to where we lived, like an hour and a half or 2 hours from where we lived. And we went there, and I met a therapist who stuttered. And again, Charles Van Riper also stuttered. So, and like this guy actually had studied with Charles Van Riper. So it was really interesting. We ended up not doing therapy, but that really got me intrigued that, maybe I should be thinking about this and going that path. And then, I pursued it in college and things went reasonably well there. And I became a speech language pathologist. And it hasn't been easy. Like, I think just, studies in speech language pathology are very rigorous and very difficult for the average student, but I think as a person who stutters, it's increasingly challenging because you have to be on and you have to be the one leading the session and doing therapy and kind of being nuanced in how you approach talking with your client. And that can be quite difficult for a person who stutters. And I think that it was just something I did. I don't think it was always easy. I was always very open about stuttering and disclosed that I stuttered to my clients and, did a reasonably well enough job to be successful. And then I think by the time I really started working with people who stutter, I think I had my own stuttering in a pretty good place that I could communicate confidently and in a way that even though I still stuttered a lot when I talked, I was able to at least communicate well enough. And that it's always been a pretty positive thing that I stuttered, almost to the point that I've needed to explain to people, especially parents, that your child doesn't have to stutter like me. I am not a guru. I am not, like anything more than just a professional who's trying to help. And I've really over time, I think, got better at sort of backing that down and saying, look, this is about when I'm working with a family or like with a child or an adult who stutters, I just kind of say, it's really about what you're going to do and what you want to do. And I'm here to help. And I may have some experiences that might add something to our conversation, but this is really about you. To your last question, I think of a series of good questions, I think to start with is that, I don't know that being a person who stutters necessarily allows someone to automatically be a good therapist. I really don't. I think there's a skill set. I think there's a knowledge base. And I think there's other factors that make someone a good therapist. I think if a person who stutters is able to gain that skill set and have those experiences and put themselves in a position where they can be effective, I think certainly being a person who stutters can provide the insight that can help, right? But I also think a lot of folks who don't stutter can be really good therapists for folks who stutter too. I think it really comes down to a lot of factors. But yeah, our personal experiences can impact others.
Yeah, well, I totally agree with you. If a doctor have a disease and he's also, uh, treating that disease of uh, uh, patient, so this like it doesn't mean that the doctor or the therapist is good or bad, because uh, um, as you said, like this all depends on the skill set. Who
Mm-hmm.
have those is a good, you know uh, a professional who are
Mm-hmm.
yeah uh, um, I asked this question because there is a myth in the stuttering a community that people who stutter are, able to treat better. So
Yeah, and again, like I think um, I study stereotypes and I study belief systems and stigma. That's kind of one of my major like areas I've spent a lot of my research time. And the thing that people like need to remember is that stigma, stereotypes, belief systems come from some kernel of potential evidence or experience that a society has had, right? So the fact that our society of people who stutter say that maybe speech language pathologists aren't so helpful. Maybe you have to be a person who stutters to treat a person who stutters. I think that does come from some kernel of logic and thought or even experience. I know that one of the things I've been trying to work hard on my whole career, and I don't know how much success I've had, is to take the burden off of speech language pathologists who aren't really well prepared or comfortable or knowledgeable about stuttering. Take that burden off of them and say, you don't have to work with people who stutter if you're not ready. If you're going to work with people who stutter, please learn as much as possible so you can, kind of do no harm and maybe do a better job. But I think if people who stutter believe that, it might be based on their personal experiences or experiences of people they know. But I don't know that that necessarily makes it true, right? I think there are, like I've worked with a lot of folks here in the U.S. and in other, countries that are therapists. They don't stutter, but they bring some sort of experience to the table that allows them to be empathetic and more helpful and with a broader view. But yeah, I also know that there's a great limit as to what a normal kind of like everyday generalist speech language pathologist can do. And I also know a lot of folks who stutter may have had really bad experiences in therapy. I mean, all these things I think are somewhat true, But yeah, like I don't think it's a necessary requirement, but I do think it can be helpful.
Yeah, like uh, related to that, I have seen people who are not SLPs, but they have they have taken therapy. They have now more fluency, and now they say I can treat people who stutter. So, in my own, you know, uh, opinion, like i- if you're not a certified uh, professional, and you say that you are going to treat people, and I think this is totally un ethical, and people should go for treatment from the professional. So wh- uh, what are your views on that?
Yeah, like I think that's really important point you bring up. I think there's a huge difference between like sort of like mutual aid and support, which I think any non-professional who cares and is in the community can probably do that. But mutual aid and support is not a clinical degree or even a clinical concept. That's just being a good human and trying to be supportive of folks like yourself. As far as delivering something that is akin to speech therapy or something that promises results or something that is, you know, quote unquote professional or quasi professional directed, I think is a really, buyer beware, I guess is my thought on that. Is I think people who are selling that, I really wish they wouldn't. I also know that there's not a lot that professional boards around the world can do about that, but I also think that folks who stutter just need to be very, very careful because like I think with how well, kind of the entire world became very good at social media and, video conference and the kinds of tools that have been around for a while, but now we've become very, very good at it and very comfortable with it. That the good side of that is there's a lot of podcasts and informational sources about stuttering. There's a lot of, like the World Stuttering Network and like other, you're with Say, right? Like World Say, is that, I'm trying to remember, like we've talked a lot, but like your like organization is sort of worldwide and exists within
Yeah,
a
big
a
global.
virtual environment. Yeah, global. That's right. I'm sorry. You say global. Yeah, that's right. Okay. So the point is, these are wonderful things. I think these are great things, bringing people together, letting them know they're not alone, doing supportive kinds of activities, encouraging each other, doing even There's a lot of public speaking organizations that do that, and I think those can be really helpful to people who stutter. I don't know that therapy and telling people how to be fluent or doing things to help them change their speech, I do think that requires a degree, because a lot of the things that I've heard about and I've seen or talked with some folks who engage in doing stuttering improvement or fluency shaping or any kind of speech therapy without the credential, I think that like opens up a lot of bad avenues. I mean, I really, really do. And I think we have some like anecdotal like evidence that that shows that. But I also have to say, I can't say that my profession as a whole, we have a lot of people not doing the right things too, even though they have a degree. So I think you just got to really beware, and you have to look for people, professionals, hopefully, who know what they're doing. You know, which is hard, because again, I know that as I've been involved in the ISA, my experiences have broadened and I've gotten to know more people. And I know that how the world handles stuttering really varies greatly, like based on the country and resources and degrees. And I think, again, it's just whoever is helping you or promising to help you, I think you have to be really careful that it's a good match for what you need, across the board.
Yeah. Thanks, Rod. So you have been working with people who stutters for more than 25 years.
Mhm.
So what is your experience with the with the
Mhm.
PWS, like who come to take the therapy, like what you can say are the personal traits if one individual who stammer don't have he uh, that treatment don't go successful versus the people who take the treatment and they start to to speak with the fluency.
Yeah. So first thing, I think fluency, like speaking without stuttering or speaking with a very limited amount of stuttering, is a byproduct of all the other work one does. So I'll just start there. And I know that that sounds very fuzzy. I don't, over time, like I think when I first started working a lot with people who stutter when I was younger, and working with my doctoral professor when I was in school, I think we did more work on speech. And I don't know that working on speech is really helpful or unhelpful. I think it's sort of neutral. But what I always noticed was that working on trying to not stutter and speaking in a slower, more controlled, fluent manner is fine. I think also that is really hard to do. Okay. And I think it also leads one to speak in an unnatural pattern. Okay. So, what's the biggest problem with stuttering? It's really not necessarily that those things occur. It's all the added muscle tension and, the really hard stuttering when one's trying not to stutter.
Yeah.
So philosophically, I have a real problem then, or over time, as I observed and worked with people and really started thinking about it, I'm like, everything one would do in a fluency shaping therapy are things you're doing not to stutter, or at least that's the approach I think that most people will embody. It's like, wow, if I talk like that, I don't stutter. So that's exactly what a person would be doing when they like introduce avoidances or changing words or fighting with themselves why they stutter, trying to not stutter. I mean, fluency shaping fits into that. And I think it takes a very specific set of successes, skill sets, and an amazing level of control to want to speak fluently all the time. Okay, so over time, I really started to move away from that. And I just started trying to work with people to think about how is speech produced when it's going well? And then how do you alter your speech mechanism? How do you alter how this entire system from your head to the bottom of your lungs, when you work with that system, what are you doing when you stutter to cause it to get more difficult? And then how can you alter that? And so I really moved away from, in very recent years, we don't really work on even techniques. We just work on how does one move their system when they're moving it in a more healthy, easier manner. And yes, it may look like some of the various stuttering techniques that I think are hallmarks to most therapy programs, but we don't call it that because I think people who stutter have it within themselves to be self-fulfilled, to be successful, to communicate well. But really what has to happen is sort of an attitude change and a paradigm shift from one of, I need to quit doing this because it's awful and it's horrible and blah, 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 to, yeah, this is really, stuttering is difficult and I've had a super difficult time with it, but I can move forward and I can do better and I can get to a point where I can live with my speech and with who I am successfully. That's really hard to do, but I think that's really the paradigm shift that I try to help people with. I got to say, too, there are some people who stutter who I've worked with who have been so beaten down that you just really feel for them. They've had such a difficult time that it is just awful. And I think most people have had a difficult time. Otherwise, they wouldn't seek out a therapist. But I also think within all of those people, everyone has things that they're good at. Everyone has things that they like to do. Every person is, in their very own way, super interesting. Everyone has sort of their thing. And really, I think a lot of times people who stutter, even when they're feeling they're struggling, are probably being somewhat successful in lots of ways. And I think that way of looking at things, and again, part of that paradigm shift of like what I'm doing is not really inherently all that unnatural, but because of how I allow others to deal with it, but also how I deal with it is really what might be causing most of my troubles. And so I really try to help people in a way that they can sort of flip that script a little bit or change how they think about it. And really the byproduct then, once one goes through a process of sort of changing how they think or changing their approach or increasing their understanding about the kinds of behaviors they're producing in their speech that make it more difficult, and their own fears and anxieties about going forward as a person who stutters. Once one can start getting more of a handle on those and maybe being aware and making some minor changes, the speech part really sort of takes care of itself. Someone might still stutter, but maybe they stutter a lot less or less severely, or at times not at all. And that those become just sort of a normal part of their experience, but maybe not something we actively work on all the time.
Yeah, Rod, this is, uh, you are right. To change the mindset, this is the main thing. The
Mm-hmm.
way we think about the world and about ourselves. If we change that, this is just a start. And then when we accept who we are, then the life becomes easy. Then the picture is clear. We have more focus what we need to do to come out of the self pity and um, um, misery and to move forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, like I think the world deals us a very difficult hand very early because it's like this. And again, lots of folks with lots of problems or lots of potential problems or lots of their own issues go through this, where something inherent about the world tells you you're doing something wrong and different. And you're not going to be okay if you don't stop doing it. And again, at times it is inherently an angry world or a angry group of people who might do that. But I think generally it's people who are somewhat well-meaning, and somewhat hopeful that if you stop stuttering, everything's going to be cheery and wonderful. But what happens is when that idea of like, you shouldn't do that, stop doing that, when that becomes part of your mindset, I think things do unravel, and I think it's hard when you're a kid to make some of these changes in mindset. But I think that's really the challenge, right? Is to sort of help kids or help teens or help people earlier on in the game started to understand that, what, this is, it's okay. Yeah, I stutter, I have a hard time. I can start to deal with that a little bit differently, but really that idea of what it does to your own psyche is really the hard part. And as you said, I think making those changes in your mindset is really key. That's the key to things getting easier.
Yeah. Yes. You have shared, uh, 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 priceless thoughts. Thank you. So you are into the research.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, at the point where we are now, so do you think in the future there will be a time where we will be able to to understand why stuttering happen, so that we will be able to you can say eliminate stuttering, or we will be in future able to help people not just to manage uh,
Mm-hmm.
stuttering, but to get um, over it, and to live a life uh, without stuttering. Is there is a chance in
Mm-hmm.
future?
Yeah, I have no idea. I can tell you that we do have some pretty good sets of like evidence to the possible things that could lead to stuttering. I think, if you look at the idea that there does appear to be worldwide a genetic predisposition. And I think that dates back to, the old like family tree studies where you would follow one family through generations and find that there were more people who stutter in this family compared to other families. And so there's that older research, but then I just think even now up to like actual looking at chromosomes and proteins and genetic makeup of a person to identify some things. And, like I think that research continues to progress and appear supportive of that there's a genetic basis to stuttering, that that seems to be part of the discussion. I think there are some observable neurological differences that have been repeated over and over again, but I say differences. I don't say that there is like necessarily an area of the brain that is categorically different in people who stutter, but there does seem to be something happening neurologically that I don't think we fully understand yet, but more and more we're getting a handle on. So what does that tell us? Well, I think it tells us, and then also, like as I alluded to, I think there's a lot of quote unquote learning and emotional and experiential impacts to stuttering that can lead somebody to continue to stutter once they start to stutter. Okay. So, all that to say this, do we know exactly why people stutter? Well, we don't. But I think we have some like indicators to what the conditions are that might lead to somebody stuttering and what causes the problem to perseverate, or for stuttering to become a problem and then to perseverate for a person. So all that to say this, do we have any indicators that this will be something that will just go away, that will have a world where we can catch people early and they will never deal with stuttering? Well, I don't know about that. I don't know that we're ever going to get that uh, far along. I also can't say I know the future. I mean, there are developments in all kinds of conditions, but I kind of guess I see it the same as like, there are people who have a hard time learning. There are people who have a condition we refer to as autism. There are people who have cerebral palsy. There are people who have Tourette's syndrome. So we have lots of conditions that we don't really think about as being curable. We think about them as being treatable or manageable, or And so I think that's really where I would put stuttering, is more in the category of those conditions, more of a developmentally based, you know, difference that can lead to real difficulties and maybe even a disability for certain people. But it's something that people can also live with fairly effectively, and that's where more of our like energies need to be put. Now, all the therapy approaches I talked about have been around for 70 plus years. So I don't, and they're still, in my opinion, and I think there's research that supports, are still sort of a pretty positive way to go, where maybe some other therapy approaches are sort of losing some support or use. And I just think that that's kind of where we are, is it's like there are things we can do to help people. People can also do things on their own to help themselves without the help of a therapist. I don't think there's a magic pill or bullet around the corner. I don't think there's, the things to eliminate stuttering, I think might be much worse than stuttering. So I don't really know that we have any like evidence that's going to change. I think that the developments we have made are the idea that people can get more information about stuttering, and they can get that they can like enter into the stuttering community and find some hope. I think those are the big developments, and I hope developments that will continue to happen.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Like the support groups
Mm-hmm.
are a source of, you can say, uh, inspiration for an individual who stutter, because
Mm-hmm.
when we are alone, we say, oh my god, I'm the
Yeah,
only person in the room or in the place that who stutters. But
yeah,
when we go into the community, we see hope. Oh, hey boy, I'm not alone. He's also, she's also. Hurrah, well done.
yeah,
So
yeah,
yes, like, yeah.
yeah. And I think that's so universal, because certainly there's cultural differences across the board. I mean, how folks go about, that there's certain rules in your culture versus my culture versus someone else's culture that like overlap, but then there's also going to be great differences. But I think the one thing is that if people can talk to each other, there can be problem solving. And like sometimes it's like, what, that may like work in the United States, but that ain't going to work here, or vice versa, right? I mean, there's differences, but you can at least talk it through, right? And you can, in that regard, even if you can't find a therapist, you can find a community of folks who can, listen and problem solve or think about, the challenges you're going through, and just again offer like inspiration, hope, or just, a good social experience, maybe at a time when it's really necessary to have that. And I think that's really true. And I think right now that's the biggest development, is that there's more interconnectivity worldwide. And I think the stuttering community has done a good job sort of like leveraging those opportunities. And like I think that's really nice. I just need more connection between therapists who might be able to help and are willing to help. We need more connection between those and the folks who can benefit, because I think that's still an ongoing challenge that I work on all the time. And I'm looking to finally, because I did start at a new university where I've had lots of other responsibilities, I do want to launch that here where I live, because again, and then maybe over time expand that out and do more things for people even outside my area. And I think that's what all of us who do this professionally need to do, is we need to increase our availability, because like that's important.
Yeah, yeah, it does. Like, as you said, that the therapist, role is a very important for the client. So when they are both, mu- um, merged, so therapist, when move just beyond the therapist and become a a mentor, I think then the life start to change for
Hmm.
the patient.
Yeah,
Right?
like I agree. I agree.
Uh, uh, um, yeah. So, like you are an individual who stutter and you have been working for so long. You're also treating people, but still, are you afraid of uh, situations or things due to your uh, stuttering, or uh, you are now we say fearless?
No, well, I say, and it's hard to know because I don't know what experiences people who don't stutter have in speaking, but I would say that I have a normal level of fear of of the kinds of situations people do, like new situations, going into a big meeting. But as far as like just related to speaking, when I go into a situation, if I stutter, I don't, like I have a lot of, either like interpersonal tools or speech therapy tools or whatever tools to sort of cope with that. So I guess I don't get too bent out of shape if I stutter. I don't get too concerned. I just sort of go on. And if the person reacts, I just kind of, in a non apologetic way, I kind of say, well, look, I stutter. That's what happened, and I just kind of move on. I don't really worry about it. I make sure that I make sure that the like listener isn't nervous, and I also make sure that the like listener doesn't say something stupid. Okay, I mean, because I think that's the key. You don't want to have them put themselves in a situation where they say something dumb about my speech,
Yeah,
because then that's going to create a kind of a problem, and it'll be hard for them to come back from that when they say something stupid. So basically, I don't worry too much about whether I'm going to stutter because I sort of live a life where I expect it. It's like, yeah, I'm probably going to stutter. I mean, why? Because I can sort of count on that. There's going to be a pretty good chance that I'm going to stutter, especially when I like enter a new conversation. But I just try to do my best, and then I don't let that bother me. I wouldn't say fearless. There's always a concern, and there's going to be situations that are just inherently new and uncertain, and things I'm going to have to deal with. So I wouldn't say fearless, but I'd also say I just go into things knowing that sometimes I'm just going to stutter, and sometimes it may be noticeable, sometimes it may not be noticeable, sometimes, but usually it doesn't like impact the conversation. Like I teach a lot in my job, and so I know, even if I know the material and I'm not inherently nervous, I'm gonna stutter when I'm up in front of a group. That's I can count on it. So I guess the idea that I sort of shift, and instead of being afraid of it, I just say, well, I know I can count on the fact that I'm going to stutter. So I'm gonna I'm gonna do what I do, right? I'm gonna talk
yeah,
how I do. I'm gonna handle it the way I know how to handle it. And if someone says something, I'm probably gonna have to do something to either ignore or deal appropriately with that situation. And I'm just gonna kind of have to move on.
yeah. Thank you. So, like, how was your experience working with an um, uh, SA? Does
Mhm.
that help you to accept your stuttering and to give a boost to the to your mental health, because being among people who stutter, and also guide them and mentor them.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, like I think really early on, because I think when I was really struggling with my stuttering and really coming to terms with the limited um, the limited success I was having with therapy. I mean, not that my therapy experiences were unsuccessful. I just think they weren't as successful as I, at a certain point, was hoping they would be. Right? If like that makes sense, this would have been, when I was probably in my early 20s. I'm like, oh, I'm only going to get so much better here. This is going to be hard. But again, I didn't fully understand what getting better was going to mean. But I was still stuttering a lot. Now I was really feeling somewhat defeated. Just the connection, like at that point, distance connection was getting a newsletter every month, and that really helped. And kind of having I'm going to sound so old, like a writing relationship where I would write letters to certain people. That was really helpful. And I think that connection really did kind of say, there's lots of ways that people can handle this, that they're stuttering. And there's people who still stutter who are doing great things. And I think I always knew that, but then it was like, oh, but that doesn't mean they got to a certain point in therapy where they then were given the keys to the city, right? It's like, okay, well, now you're okay with stuttering. You can be successful. I think even though I didn't mean to, I was still thinking about it in that way. And I just think like that interaction at first by letters was really helpful. And then I think that there was a support group that I helped start in the town I lived with when I was going to my early college. And that was really helpful, just being around other people who stutter and being able to tell my story and talk about my story. And then I think I didn't do a lot, besides like doing service activities for the national organization and going to a few conferences. I never had a ton of experience with the like NSA nationally. I mean, I helped out when I could. But as far as the local groups I ran, those are always really helpful. And then later, it just got to a point where it was really hard to manage everything I was doing, that I don't think I was as involved in the local group that I started and that sort of thing, just because it was like there's only so many hours in the day and my kids were little. So I would say over time it became less of a thing and more of something I wanted to do for others. But I think early on that connection was critical for me and very helpful to me.
Yeah. So, like you mentioned your daughters. So, like being an individual who's stutter, I think one of the biggest nightmares. We think that like in the first start few years, we are so keen about that. There are children don't stutter. So how was your uh, experience? Were you uh, relaxed, or it's fine, no problem, or yeah, uh, you were keen, or I need to watch if she's
Yeah, that's
start to
interesting. Yeah.
stutter or not.
Yeah, I didn't. I wouldn't say I was worried. I was like I would say that like I was aware that was a possibility. I tried not to be over concerned. I tried not to think about it too much. But like it's hard not to, right? Because you do see that wow, you could be the best possible parent. You could be the most understanding of stuttering, and it's still probably going to bother your kid a little bit because there is that feeling of being out of control that is so inherent, But yeah, like I just sort of didn't. The worst thing you can do, I think, with a lot of problems that your children might have is get really, really, really over concerned and sort of overdo it. So I was aware of not doing that, I think, as much as I was worried about them starting to stutter because, really, we're not in that much control. And I try to just always tell myself, it's like I'm not in that much control here. I can probably only worry myself. And I think as a parent, you always worry, right? So to me, it was more like, well, and they didn't. They were both very verbal. They both showed absolutely no signs. It was just sort of, again, it's like, it's sort of dumbfounding because my family, especially on my mother's side of the family, there's a long history of stuttering. So it's like I was like, what's the chances we're going to get through a whole generation, which would be my kids and my brother's kids? How are we going to get through a whole generation without someone who stutters? And we have. I mean, there's about what, like 9, 10 children, or my nieces and nephews and stuff, and then my kids, no one stutters. I mean, a few of them have had periods where they were sort of kind of the developmental, where they were 2, 3, 4, and they were showing signs, but no one continued to stutter. I'm sort of the only one in a couple generations now. So it's so hard to predict that I think I try not to think about it. I'm not going to think about it because I can't control it.
That's true. I think the best strategy is to not to think
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah. Do you have children?
Yes, I have a daughter. So in the start, when she was little, so like when a child start to speak and they stutter sometimes, so um, I was very worried or observant to see that if she start to stutter or not, but I'm glad she
Yeah.
didn't. So
Yeah. Yeah, because that's what people will ask. It's like, well, you seem to handle it so well. Would you be bothered if your child stuttered? I said, well, of course I'd be bothered, because it's hard. It didn't come easy. So to like me, it's like, well, of course I'm relieved that they don't stutter. It's like it'd be the most dishonest thing to say, oh, if they stuttered, it would have been okay. It's like, well, it would have been okay, but yeah, it would have been hard too for them, and that's hard. Period.
yeah, but
But it's also not. Trust me, a lot worse things could happen to your child than stuttering. But it's also like, yeah, but I'm also not going to be toxic positive guy here saying, oh, it's great. It's like, no, it's not. It's hard. It's a challenge.
because like yeah, like yeah, like I have been through a lot due to my uh, stuttering, and that has also given me mental health issues like
Mhm.
stress, anxiety, and so on. So like
Mhm.
I don't want my child to go through all that. So
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Like that's the stance I took. It's like, look, like I'm gonna be so okay with the fact that my kid stutters. I'm gonna be so okay with it. I'm gonna be accepting, but I'm also not gonna sit here and say, oh yeah, it's great. I mean, no, because it's hard. We've all, any of us who have gone through this, and continue to live with stuttering and continue to do our best. It's not easy. I mean, it gets easier, hopefully, but it's not easy, and I think it'd be crazy to think or to not worry about your child,
yeah,
you know,
and we are glad that they don't
for
stutter.
sure.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of challenges in the world, and if you can take one off the list, that's a good one. That's always a good thing.
exactly.
Great.
Okay, so being in ISA, how was the experience, and what you
Mhm.
see the future of ISA and its part in the stuttering community
Mhm.
globally?
Yeah, like I think that's what's been really interesting about the time period I've been on it, is that I joined right when the world locked down. I mean, I started right during the pandemic. So I think a lot of it was just keeping all of us connected was really, when I joined, seemed to be more of the thing. And it's been really nice meeting all the other board members, and some of us have came on the board at the same time, so it's been kind of neat to spend multiple years with these folks. And I think that's really been the question that we continue to ask ourselves is what role do we fill, within the stuttering community, and what do we do? And I think that's kind of been an ongoing discussion. And I think it'll be like interesting as we continue to develop what to kind of fit into this world where there's a lot of like international like organizations for stuttering and self-help. And so what can we do that it doesn't really have to compete with any other organization, but also fills a niche? And I think one thing that we've been doing, and I know we have one coming up here in a couple of weeks, is we have a couple meetings every year where we just get all or many of the member like organizations together into one Zoom meeting, and then we just chat. So it's almost like that is kind of a something I think we did as a kind of a clearing the air kind of experience, where it's like let's get like everyone together and talk about like issues or things that all of us could do better because maybe the board's not doing enough. And it ended up not being like that at all. It ended up being more that this is great, we're all just talking to each other. Right. And like that was really nice. So we're going to be doing that again, then we're going to be doing another. And like I think that's a good thing that we can continue to do, is maybe be sort of the hub or the go-to for the member organizations or leaders to get together. So that's one thing I think we're doing now that I don't believe was done before. I think that this podcast that you're doing is going to be really helpful, and I do want to contribute to that. I know that is going to be helpful because I think just the more podcasts out there, because I know for me, because I've become a really big podcast listener and follower of all kinds of different topics, but I stumble upon podcasts. I don't like go looking for them. I stumble upon them when I'm listening to something else or if I'm just doing a search for a topic. And so I think, there's more podcasts on stuttering than I think people could have ever imagined, but there's still not that many. So I think these more, interactional podcast kind of experiences, or even like informational podcasts, I think those are going to be really helpful because maybe the ISA podcasts can be one that people stumble upon, And
Yeah.
I think just more that idea of helping with the connectiveness is certainly short term and long term the ISA can do.
Yeah, like this is the main uh, idea to
Yeah,
yeah to connect people. So yeah, my last question: uh,
good.
what are like what message you will give to people who stutter and to the uh, community uh, uh, regarding their stuttering and how they can make them better
Hmm. Yeah,
and useful and a productive part of society. What message would you uh,
yeah.
like to give?
Yeah, like I think the number one thing is fight like crazy not to let stuttering hold you back. I mean, I really think that's where the like energy needs to go. And it's not fighting against stuttering, it's just being diligent about doing what you want to do with what you have. And I think we all have lots of gifts, and we shouldn't let our beliefs about stuttering be what holds us back.
Thank you, Rod. Thank you so much. And dear uh, fellows, I hope you guys have found this podcast interesting and have learned a lot from this. And I'm thankful to Rodney to uh, take up time from his busy schedule and shared his um, insights and rich experience thoughts. And well uh, uh, look out for our upcoming program, and a new podcast. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe our social media handles. Thank you guys. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye.